there.
We are officially.
No, you're good.
Awesome keys here.
Oh, you can also sit in for my talk. It's about STAR.
It's about time management.
Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here. My name is Jesus Romo, and I'm assistant professor in the Department of Molecular Biology, Molecular Microbiology and Immunology. And this is a session that I do for the graduate students in the PhD program in our department about time management organization. This actually, is part of a course that I developed, and it came from the students really wanting to have more guidance and the aspect of professional development. So the grad students in our program requested a course, and in that course, this is one of the modules that we discuss, which is about how to manage your time, how to get organized, right? Because ultimately you want to graduate and move on to that next stage, and you want to make sure that your time is as efficient, is spent as efficiently as possible, right? So, but the reality is that the title of this talk should really be something else. Wait, what is not moving? It should move now, okay. It should be titled, "Why do I do this to myself?" Right? Why do I wait until the last minute? Why is everything all over the place? Right? And not really making the most out of my time. I think all of us do this. It's normal, right? I'm hoping that this session will give you some tools that can help you combat some of these things, right? To really get organized and to make the most out of your time. But I'm sure all of us have felt like this at some point or another. I'm feeling like that golf cart going underwater right now. But again, these tools are very, very helpful. So I want to start by discussing, why should you manage your time? Why should you actually care about these things, right? I know it may sound a little cliche, but the reality is that your time is the most valuable thing that you have, right? That is something that you cannot get back. If you spend it on the wrong things, you might regret that later, especially when it comes to your professional, your career. And having good time management and organization skills, really, I think it helps in a lot of areas of your life, not just, your career, right? Supports your mental health, right? Being better organized, being more efficient with your time leads to less stress, right? Being, dealing with anxiety all the time and all these things that you have to do and feeling like you're drowning all the time. It really helps you create this balance between your personal and professional life. I'm married. I have a 4-year-old and we have a baby on the way that's due at the end of April, right? So I want to make sure that when I come into work, I make the most out of my time and I can go home and have dinner with my wife and my daughter and soon my son, right? So to me, this is something that's very important. I think we don't really pay a lot of attention to really good foundation and time management and organization, right? It also increases productivity. This goes without saying. Right? If you're following these things, you're generating more data, you're writing more, right? You're doing more experiments if you're in a lab. And again, I'm coming from STEM, so I will use some examples from the biological sciences, but also helps you fight off this procrastination, right? If you know exactly what you need to be doing every hour of every day while you're at work, it helps with that a lot. And once you get rolling and you have this momentum, it's a lot easier to overcome that. Right? If you have all these stopping points and you have no idea what you need to do now, and you're trying to figure out what should I do next, that leads to these drop-offs in productivity, right? So by knowing what you need to be doing, you fight off that procrastination, right? This is really important. Also, I don't know if I can check, you can check the chat. If there's any questions in the chat, or if you have any questions, please let me know. This is your time. Happy to answer any questions about this. This is something that I'm constantly working on, right? Trying to find new strategies and new tools that are not only efficient for me, but also for graduate students and undergraduates as well. All right, so I want to do a quick Mentimeter. This is a way to do a poll. So if you're on Zoom, please go to menti.com. I'm going to start my Menti presentation right now, and it's going to give you a code. You're going to type that code in, and it's going to take you to my question that I have for you. Okay, and then we're going to see your answers in real time here. So you should be able to see my screen. Am I sharing? You see my screen? No, okay, let me share it. Right here. There we go. So that code at the top, please enter that and it'll take you to this question. I want to know which time management and organization tools you're currently using. Something that you rely on, something that you use regularly, something that you may or may not like. I just want to know what you're doing. We'll take a couple minutes to
daily memory.
Oh,
My failing memory.
yeah, I mean,
I just turned 52 this last weekend.
no,
Yes.
you don't look.
Yeah.
No, I'm serious.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I don't use any time management tools. That's fine. Most people don't, right? Unless you know about them, right? No, we don't get a lot of, well, now you do through the graduate school, which is fantastic. But we don't really get a lot of guidance unless you are, reading books about this, attending workshops, seminars, and things like that. We don't really get a lot of guidance. So some of you, my memory, sticky notes. Oh, trust me, sticky notes. I see my undergrads in my lab use them all the time. It scares me a little bit because I go up to the sticky notes and there's results and like methods written on that. I'm like, if I blow in these sticky notes, there goes the whole experiment. So it's a little stressful, right? Somebody uses a planner. That's a great way to start. To start with a planner. I mean, we all, a lot of us that like to do this start that way. Put it in my calendar. Fantastic. A checklist, to-do list, great way to start my calendar, but I don't follow it 100%. And that's something that I want you to take from this session. Putting something in your calendar should be a ritual and should be something that you adhere to completely because it will make a difference. Calendars, to-do lists, calendar, sticky notes, planners, calendar, great. Blocking time, love that. Blocking time for professional and personal time. I do that on my calendar. I think it's important. Notepads, agendas, to organize the things you have to do. Okay, so it looks like we have a range, right? Some people are not really using a lot of strategies or any, and others are kind of in this range of, starting with some of the basics, calendar, planners. That's great. Today, I hope to introduce several new strategies, and some of these strategies you can actually they're kind of plug and play. If you're already using a calendar or a planner, you can introduce those strategies very easily into what you already are doing. And that's the whole point of this, right? So thank you for that. I'm going to go back to my presentation. Don't leave Menti.com. I have another activity in a little bit. All right, so now we're gonna go back to PowerPoint. Here. Stop sharing. I want to share my PowerPoint. Right here. All right, so thank you for those answers. Now it kind of gives me an idea where we all are. Right, so I have to click next and then it lets me go. Okay, so what I do want to tell you, hide floating meeting control. So what I do want to tell you is that any tool that you use is useless without a couple of things, right? First is you really need to know your milestones. You need to know your goals, and you have to be very clear about these things. You also have to know your deadlines. If you don't know any of those things, it does not matter what tool you use, it's not going to be effective, right? That's the whole point of this. But you also need to understand that you need to be flexible, right? When we give ourselves these deadlines, try your best to adhere to them. Sometimes it may happen, sometimes it won't happen, and that's okay. I think a lot of us underestimate how much work it takes to accomplish a task. Usually, at least what the literature says, is 2 to 3 times longer than what you actually think, right? So that's a long time, especially if you're mapping out these very long projects. And I'm going to talk to you about how to map your week versus your semester and things like that, right? So again, as we're going through this, I want you to be thinking about, well, what are my milestones? If I'm a grad student, what's coming up this semester? Do I have an oral qualified exam? Or do I have a committee meeting? Is there a paper that I'm working on? Pick a couple of those examples because at the end, we're going to do an activity of trying to work out some of these goals and make them into SMART goals, right? So that we can use them with these tools that I'm talking about. And again, if you have any questions, let me know. Am I sharing? Can you see it? Yeah? Okay. All righty. So again, interesting.
What if you move your mouse?
But see, now it does it. If I stop moving the mouse, it'll kind of get stuck on the side. I don't know why. So there's going to be several things that I want to talk about. And obviously there's an infinite number of tools and strategies. You can, really, you can spend all day, all month really reading about it and talking about it. These are the things that I've used that have worked for me and I know work for students. Time tracking. We're going to talk about that today. It's very hard. Okay, but it's totally worth it. We're going to talk about the weekly planning meeting. This is a meeting that you have with yourself every week for at least 30 minutes to organize the following week, right? To me, this is one of the most important strategies. I am not a fan of coming in on Monday morning and be like, okay, what am I going to do this week, right? I already feel like I'm behind. So I usually plan for the next week, Friday before I go home, right? We're gonna talk about strategic plan. This is very detailed, and if you have, I'm gonna give you kind of just the bones of it. If you want to know more about it, shoot me an email. I'm happy to send you a more detailed form to fill out as you're planning this. But this is for you to plan a semester. Now, you might think that planning a semester is only for teachers, people who are teaching. But the reality is that's for everybody. If you're a grad student, you need to know what you're doing the entire semester, right? Are you going to conferences? Are there experiments you want to finish? Again, are there deadlines? If you're thinking week by week, that might hinder your longer term goals, right? So everything builds into that. So really think ahead. I have my students do a strategic or a form of it, actually use a mentor and compact and an individual development plan that allows us to plan short term, so semester by semester, including the summers, and then long term, so the IDP year by year, right? So there's tools out there. Today I'm going to tell you about the strategic plan. I'm going to talk about why the calendar should be your friend, why you should be using our calendar. And then as your grad students, right, I'm going to talk about establishing a writing habit. This is probably the hardest thing to do for students, for faculty, for really anybody. People that are not even in STEM can tell you how difficult it is to establish a writing habit, right? Then we're gonna wrap up with setting SMART goals, and then how do you prioritize some of those goals at the end, right? All right, so time tracking, right? Very difficult to do, but it's very, very helpful, right? I will tell you, this is probably one of the hardest things I've done that have to do with time management. And to really make the most out of time management and organization strategies and tools, you really need to know where your time is going before you even start, right? So this tool allows you to really identify any areas where you might be putting extra time and that you shouldn't be doing that. For example, are you spending hours a day on email when you should be doing other things, right? You might be able to adjust some of those timings, right? So it allows you to really see big picture, where's my time going? And I think ultimately the question that we should be asking ourselves when we do this activity is how I'm spending my time aligning with how I'm being evaluated, right? You're being evaluated. There's some metrics that evaluate promotion, graduation, whatever it is. Is your time aligning with those, with how you're going to be evaluated, right? So if you're a grad student, again, you need papers to graduate. Your time should be spent, a lot of it, on writing and collecting data, right? So is your time actually going there? So that's what time tracking does, right? So I'm going to kind of walk you through this. I use a very strict version of this. I've had students kind of play a little bit with it. I find that the strict version, if you do it for a full week, works well. And I'll tell you right now, from any time that I've done this, even my own experience, the first week that you try to do this, it is like the weirdest week of your life. That never happens to you, and for whatever reason, things are different this week. That's okay. Try again until you have what you feel like is a normal week, right? You'll see you're starting to track your time this week, and oh, you got a flat tire, or you have these things that popped up that you weren't expecting. That's okay. The idea is to try to find something that is kind of consistent week by week. You go through these same things. You come to lab, you do an experiment, you collect data, you have to go to seminar, you have to go to class, things like that to really structure it, right? So how does it work? So again, first thing is you need to identify what you want to track. We all want to track different things because we all are interested in different things, right? So what I actually track is my writing, research, things having to do with teaching, mentoring, and student meetings. That's when I'm evaluated, it's really my research, my writing, and my teaching, right? And spending time with students. You can also do things like, I felt like I was wasting a lot of time on email. So I'm going to show you my pie chart. From the beginning, when I first did this activity, again, I felt like I was wasting a lot of time on email that I shouldn't. Email is, I've seen students that takes them like 20 minutes to craft one email because they're so worried about saying the wrong word or having nobody cares. The reality is that nobody really cares, right? Like you want to use your time for something valuable. I also wanted to see whether my time was going to professional development. To me, that's very important. And obviously time spent with family, wellness, things that are important to you. I meditate in the mornings. So I want to make sure that my time is actually going to that, right? So here's how it works. You have to track your time. So I would advise that you carry like a little notepad, or hopefully not stickies because you want to keep those sheets together, right? A notepad, and every 15 minutes, that's the strict time, right? Every 15 minutes. 30 is fine. I wouldn't do like every couple hours and be like, what did I do for the last 2 hours. It doesn't work that well, right? You're gonna forget about the things that you did. So usually 15 to 30 minute time window works well. Just have the notepad with you and write it down. You know, I had coffee, or I read a paper, or I went to seminar for an hour, and just kind of keep track of what you're doing. At the end, you're gonna put this data into a spreadsheet and generate a pie chart. Just kind of get big picture of where's my time actually going, right? Trust me, it might be shocking at the beginning, but it's very useful because right now, you really don't have an idea where your time is going, right? You might think like, I know what I did throughout the day, but you can't get a big picture of where is my time actually going until you do this, right? And you can't calibrate until you do this, right? So this is what mine looked like, right? So like I said, I wanted to do writing, research, teaching. This from my first semester here. I was just establishing my lab, you know, teaching, mentoring, meeting with students. I meet with all my students, grad and undergrad, every week for an hour. You know, having to do with teaching, anything related to mentoring, so like training them in the lab and stuff like that. You know, meetings unrelated to my research, right? So, you know, some faculty meetings and other things like that, committee meetings. How much time I was spending on email, wellness, personal, family, friends, professional development. You know, I was okay with this at the beginning because when I was starting, I had to get all my projects up and running. You know, I only had 2 people in the lab when we started, so a lot of my time was going to really research in that writing, try to get some grants and papers out the door. Right, but the rest of the things, you know, I still think that's a huge chunk on email of my weekly time. I could probably do less than that, right? And again, you can modify different things. I know there are some students who want to track their commute. I would advise against that. And the reason for that is because you can't really do anything about your commute, right? You want to track things that you can actually calibrate, you can actually change. Unless you drive faster, you can't do anything about your commute, right? I don't advise you to be doing that. So this is what it should look like. I would encourage you to do this, you know, discuss it with a friend, discuss it with a mentor, you know, so you can get some feedback and try to identify areas that you can, you know, modify, so you can get a little more time, right? Like that email thing may add up to a couple hours a week. You could be doing other things with that, right? What questions do you all have at this point? Is there anything in the chat? Do you have any questions?
Like how do we do the pie chart? Like we have to put like the times that we are doing each thing?
Yeah. So what I do is I basically go through and I have it, you can do it however you want. And if you email me, I'm happy to share my template that I use. So I usually get to my lab at 6 a.m. Right? And before that, I do my meditation, all that stuff. So I kind of start about 5, and then I have time slots 5 to 5:15, 5:15 to 5:30. So I line it up and then I write up like, what am I doing? Right? So I could put like meditation, and that falls under my well-being and so on. And then you use that data and you kind of tally up the amount of time you're spending on those things and kind of generate that pie chart. Yeah.
Bobby Faith is asking if the presentation will be shared with.
Yeah, I'm happy to share it. Yeah, I'll remove some of the GIFs and memes and stuff like that to make it less silly, but yeah, I'm happy to share this. I give it to all my students. I think it's very useful. But yeah, ultimately you would have this really long, you know, like on the first tab, it would be like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then you kind of put all that data together into your a pie chart. Yeah. All right, so time tracking. Again, the whole point of this is to know where your time is spent so that you can actually calibrate and adapt these other tools that we're going to talk about, right? So now that you know how your time is being spent, let's start making some changes and start planning your week so you're the most efficient, right? So this is where, again, I think if you pick anything out of this entire session, I would advise that it's the weekly planning meeting. It would make it will make a difference for you. And I know students who are like, well, I already do that. And when I ask them, well, what does that mean? Well, I have a to-do list for the next week. Okay. But how does that line up with your calendar, right? How does that fit into everything else that you need to do, right? So the weekly planning meeting is more than creating a to-do list. This is actually introducing tasks into your calendar and adhering to that, right? So this is a 30-minute session. It can be longer if you want to. Again, for the whole point of efficiency, it doesn't need to be longer than 30 minutes. And once you start doing this a couple times, you're gonna see that 30 minutes is more than enough time to get your meeting in. You know, it will help you plan the next week. Like I said, I do mine on Friday afternoons when I'm kind of wrapping up everything before I go home. I sit down, I look at everything that needs to be accomplished the following week. Right? Some people like to do it on Mondays. It's really what works for you. I like to know ahead of time. Like I said, I don't wanna get there on Monday and be like, okay, what do I need to do now? Because now, there could be some things that you could have prepared for, maybe over the weekend, usually, hopefully not. But again, I would advise try Friday afternoon first. If you don't like that, you can modify that. Well, whatever works for you week-wise. So the first thing you're gonna do is divide it up into different chunks, right? This 30-minute meeting. The first 5 minutes is this thing known as the skeleton, right? And what do we mean by the skeleton? This is really items that are non-negotiable. These are items that you cannot move around. Doctor's appointments, classes, you have to go to seminar. These are things that you cannot move at all for any reason, right? That's your skeleton. Write those things down, right? Everything else now has to be built around that. And once you do this, you're gonna realize how little time we actually have. Once you start putting things into the calendar that, maybe you need to pick up your kid from daycare at this point in time, at this time of the day or whatever, that's not negotiable, right? You have to. It may also be like, oh, you have to be in a committee meeting, you have to go to a conference, you have to do this, you have to do. There are things that you just can't move, right? So that's your non-negotiable items, your skeleton. That's 5 minutes. Just brainstorm, put everything on paper, right? The idea here is that you have a white sheet of paper in front of you and you just start writing out the things that you need to accomplish. The next session is the brain dump, right? This is 10 minutes. So now that you know your skeleton and these are things I cannot move, so I gotta work around these times. Now you work out, on the things that you want to accomplish, right? And I'm gonna tell you right now, you're not gonna be able to accomplish everything the following week, right? So for the purpose of the activity, you write down everything you want to accomplish. I usually divide it up into research, mentoring, personal. You can do it however you want, right? So everything you want to accomplish. I want to finish, again, writing this paper. I want to do this experiment. I want to do this. I want to do that. Throw everything on paper, right? Then is the hard part, because now you're gonna have to delegate. Potentially delegate. Maybe move some things to the following week because not everything's gonna fit, and that's okay. The idea of this is to get everything out of your mind, and I really do feel like writing everything down helps you a lot with your stress because you can kind of see it on paper. It's not all just floating around unorganized in my head. So the last 15 minutes of this is a task meets your calendar activity. Now you go back, you look at your skeleton, you put that into your calendar, right? These are the times I cannot move. Then you go back and you look at everything you want to accomplish from the brain dump part and start putting it into your calendar. What are the best times where you can try to accomplish this, right? Is your experiment a 3-day experiment? Maybe you should start on Monday or Tuesday, and so you have some time. Give yourself estimate time. It might be difficult on here to estimate how long it's going to take you to do this. So what I do, for example, I try to put in 1 hour for reading manuscripts, right? Or if I have to review a paper, usually you're reviewing multiple papers at once, I'll put up 1 hour. This is the amount of time I'm spending on this. If I don't finish it, so be it. I'm moving on to the next thing, right? That's how you have to do this and really adhere, because otherwise, what's the whole point of this activity? If you have 1 hour for reading a paper and you say, oh, I'm going to keep going. Now you're bleeding into the rest of your activities and there goes your day, right? So being very strict. It's okay to have reoccurring things throughout the week. Like I said, I have, on Wednesday, again, I'll have a 1 hour for reviewing papers and things like that. Again, they're not going to fit. So now you have to do a list of priorities, right? When we're grad students, we feel like every week is the most important week of your life, but that's not true, right? You should be really thinking long-term, right? So really think through what is priority. Are there any things that I can push forward? Delegate. Is there anybody you can delegate to, right? Maybe you're doing an essay that is pretty simple. You've trained an undergrad to do this. You might be able to give them that opportunity to do more research and delegate that aspect of the project, something small, right? But also lowering the level of perfection. Like that example I gave you at the beginning about students taking like 30 minutes writing an email. Not everything needs 100% perfection or 100% effort into what we do. Sometimes 60-70% effort is enough for the majority of things, right? Like really put that effort into the things that are important, into how you're being evaluated, right? Everything else can wait. right? So this is how this activity works. Again, 30-minute total, skeleton, brain dump, put everything into the calendar, right? I love this. My calendar always looks very full and I know exactly what I need to be doing at all times. But it also allows you, again, remember how I said at the beginning to try to be flexible. So what I try to do, 2 days out of the week, I try to introduce some flexibility into my day. Where, in the afternoon, I might give, a gap, about a 1 hour gap in between activities. And the reason for that is because you never know what's gonna come up. Sometimes students come in and they're like, oh, I need to discuss this, or I'm having an issue with this experiment, or whatever it is. That's where your flexibility comes in, right? You can move things into that flexible spot throughout the week. You can't plan for everything, but this will make a huge difference. So I'm gonna stop here for questions and then we'll move on to the next, which is now planning your semester. So what questions do you all have? I know it seems daunting, but it's actually not that bad. Go ahead, sorry.
No, yeah, the weekly planning, what we're doing right now, do you just for us to do it like on paper or like online or like?
So like when you do this, yeah, I just do it on a piece of paper. And then once I put it into my calendar, I just throw it away. It's kind of like a brainstorming kind of, it works really well that way. Like I said, I line them up and then, the last part of priority, not everything's gonna fit into the calendar. And by us really trying to fit everything we feel like we should be accomplishing, you're really are doing yourself, your mental health and yourself at the service, right? You're not gonna be able to. Is there any questions in the chat? Or, no, we're good. Okay, good. Like I said, it's pretty straightforward. Happy to talk to you more about this. It works really well. I'm trying to get my PhD students into this. They seem to enjoy it. Well, take that back. Maybe not enjoy it, right? Because it's extra work, but honestly, this makes your whole week a lot more efficient. And ultimately, the goal is more time for you personally, right? For your mental health, right? That's the whole point of this. I try to really discourage my students from working nights or weekends in the lab or after hours. If you plan your week and you know what needs to be done, 90% of the time you won't have to do that, right? I do really believe that, except for animal experiments, sometimes I come in on the weekends because we have animal experiments. But the majority of the time, if you're there in late night or on weekends, usually that's poor planning, right? Other times you can't avoid it because of the experimental design, that's just what it is. You have animals or living things like I said, like mice, you work around their schedule. Outside of that, unless something goes wrong, usually it's poor planning, right? You shouldn't have to be doing that.
Around the mice's schedule?
Yeah. Yeah, we have to work around their schedule because we have very specific times to do different things to them and with them. So when they arrive, it's kind of like my entire time is for them, for what needs to be done. And our animal experiment usually lasts about a month and a half. Yeah. But yeah, so usually we work around that. There's no weekends when the animals are in because we have to go in and do something called like some form of metric. We look at gastrointestinal infections. So we have to collect poop, plate, and figure out how much of the pathogen is present, are they making toxins and so on. So yeah, so we can't avoid things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a weekly planning meeting. Again, just week. If you take one thing from today's session, try this. This is gonna make a huge difference. And adhere to it, give it a couple weeks. Once it becomes a habit, you're gonna see it's gonna change everything for you. Structure-wise, right, and efficiency. So, great, you can plan your meeting, but what about your semester? Remember I told you, sometimes we're working towards longer goals. End of semester, right, for us, the summer is a huge travel time because we have conferences, right? So we usually have 3 to 4 conferences over the summer. So to get there, you have to generate that data and you have to write those papers and submit those abstracts and all that stuff. So really having those deadlines in your calendar and really understanding, it makes sense, right? So the week planning is gonna tell you what you need to do each week, make you more efficient. But you're kind of going blinded into the rest of the semester and what you're working towards, right? So planning a whole semester is an important strategy to really get all your deadlines in place, right? And not miss anything, be prepared for all these things. So what is the whole point of this? Like I said, I'm giving you like a little chunk of this. If you want to know more, I can give you my more detailed form. Strategic planning usually takes me a couple hours. It's not like the 30-minute weekly planning meeting because here I'm planning my teaching, I'm planning the papers that I'm working on, I'm planning the research, right? So there's all these things that have to happen. So it may be longer. Usually it's the range of like 3 to 4, and sometimes I do it in chunks, like little pieces, before the semester starts, right? So it's supposed to map your semester both academically, and you can put personal stuff in here, that's totally fine, right? You can map out whatever, any project, right? When I go to a conference, or you wanna write this paper, I usually find, at least my experience, it works best when you're mapping out these really, large projects, like writing projects, for example. How are we going to accomplish that? Anybody can say, my goal for this semester is to write a paper. That means nothing, right? I wanna write a paper this semester, doesn't mean it's gonna happen, right? But if you are very strategic and you map out step by step what needs to happen for me to have that paper done, it will get done, right? Just saying it's not gonna manifest it into existence, right? So again, this whole point of this is to map out these larger projects that take multiple steps to accomplish, right? Not the week by week, right? I would advise, once you get used to this, you can increase. I'm working on like 4 to 5 projects a semester. That's kind of what I mapped. Start with 2 to 3. If you don't feel too comfortable, start with 1. That's totally fine. It's just for you to get used to this tool, right? Something that you want to work on. An easy one is a paper. If you have a paper, if you have an experiment or whatever it is, it's a good one to work on. Like I said, so for the purpose of this example, let's think of it as if you're writing a paper. You're grad students, right? You are writing papers. At some point, you're going to be. So let's say you want to write a paper by the end of the semester, right? What you have to do here is first identify that goal. I want to write a paper, right? But now you need to figure out, one, how am I going to be accountable for writing that paper, right? Am I going to have a writing buddy? That's a great tool. Working together, having some time for writing every week, giving each other feedback, things like that, right? Is that going to be a family member? Is that going to be somebody in my lab, somebody at school, right? So you have to identify how am I going to, who's going to check that I'm actually writing? Ultimately, you have to be accountable for yourself, but that's hard to do sometimes. So having some form of mechanism of accountability is very important for this activity, right? The next thing is you have to map out these steps. And when I say steps, I mean everything that needs to be done so that this project is actually accomplished, right? So what do we mean by that, right? So for example, you want to write a paper, you need to identify what data you're going to use to tell your story, right? And once you put all that data out, you have to ask yourself, is this enough data to tell the story? Do I need more data collection? Do I need more experiments, right? 2, you have to account for the fact that before that paper is submitted, multiple people have to give you feedback on it, right? Mentors, collaborators, that could take a couple months, at least, right? The other thing is, do I have the right collaborators, right? Do I have the right people that need to be here? Do I know what journal this is going to go to? So all these little things, make a list and say, by this date, I want to have this thing done, and so on, right? And then once you have this outline, then you put dates to it, right? You say, I want to finish by the end of the semester, let's say May, right? Then you go through and now you see why it takes so long to put this together, because now you have to sit down and say, okay, I know that to finish this paper, I need to, 1, write it. And we're going to talk about how do you accomplish each of these sections for the paper. 2, I have to, again, 1, first I have to have the data. 2, I have to write it. I have to get feedback from people, right? There might be collaborators. I need to figure out references that I'm going to use. I need to figure out what journal this is going to go to, all that. Make a list, try to assign dates to it. And I know some of these might be, you're estimating. You're not going to have exact dates, but try to adhere to them, right? And again, it may take you 2 to 3 times longer than what you actually thought it was going to take, right? So that's how this works. You can see there's a lot of work that goes into it up front, but again, this is a document that now you go back the entire semester to look at. Are you actually adhering to this? Are you accomplishing these goals, right? And this document has a sheet where the first page is, you have the project, you break it down into components of that project, right? Data analysis, right? Making figures for this paper, everything. Then you add dates to it. Then you break it down week by week and you put that back into your calendar, into your weekly things, right? So what I mean by that is, you already know how to plan a week. This gives you the whole semester. right? So you're doing the long-term plus week by week. So long-term would be, some of these things should already be on your calendar before you start your every week planning. Because you already know that I'm gonna dedicate 1 hour, Monday and Wednesday for making figures. We all know that making figures takes forever when you're doing, analyzing data, making these figures. Put it on your calendar. You can have time for writing. I have time for writing in my schedule every day, Monday through Friday. And I adhere to that time, right? And once the time is up, I have to move on to the next activity, right? And you can kind of figure out what works for you, but that works well for me, right? So this is long-term, break it down, give it dates, put it in your calendar, and now you're doing your weekly planning, right? Any questions so far about this? Again, you don't have to jump right into this one. Fill out the week by week. Pick one project if you want to do this. I'm happy to, send you more guidance over email or talk to you, right? So again, at the end, you're going to put these deadlines, right? If you know my paper needs to be submitted by this deadline, work backwards. Say, what do I need to accomplish, by each of these dates leading up to that? Put that into your calendar. The putting into the calendar, unlike the weekly meeting, doesn't take 50 minutes. It takes about an hour to really map out your whole semester, right? And like I said, ultimately, if you don't adhere to these, then they're not really going to be useful for this. So really try your hardest to see them as standing appointments with yourself that you don't want to move, right? So you mapped out your weeks. You have an idea of how to organize your semester. Now let's talk about some habits, right? And then, like I said, I usually talk about multiple habits with grad students for the course, but since this is, a shorter session, the habit I chose to discuss was writing, right? You need to be writing, and don't wait until it's your last semester to start writing. You should be writing all the time. That is the reality. Papers, dissertation, you should always be writing, right? So I want to go to menti.com again, and I have another question for you. So let me go here. Okay. Where are you? Oh, share my screen. It's the same code, so you should just be able to see the next question. I gotta hide these things again. Actually, let me just go back and go to my second question here because it's easier to. And the question here is, as graduate students and postdocs, how are you evaluating? I kind of already given you a couple hints as I've been talking, but how do you think you're being evaluated? What decides whether you move on to the next stage or you stick around longer? And this is a word cloud, so you just throw a couple words that you might think. Papers, yeah. In some fields, it's a little bit different, right? Like I know for the College of Sciences, the students have to have one published paper before they can graduate, right? So different colleges can be different, right? It could be different responses. I'll tell you, for promotion for faculty, you have to have papers and grants. Otherwise, you're gonna get promoted, right? And when you don't get promoted as tenure track, you have to leave, right? So that's kind of how it works. Lecture grading, right? So if some of the stuff that you're doing as it's also TAing, and maybe there's more teaching involved in your degree, definitely, right? The time you spend grading lectures, lecture and grading, I'm assuming that's what this one means. Good. Anything else? I know there's about 10 people that put response early. The quality of your work, yeah, for sure, right? If you're doing experiments, you're collecting data, you're analyzing that, right? Ultimately, that leads into publications, right? And publications, your research, those are metrics that people use grants and funding as well, right? So deliverables, yeah, so results from experiments, papers, I mean, that can be seen as that as well. For some people, you need grants to be able to move on to the next stage, right? That shows that people believe in your ideas and you can get money to conduct these experiments and so on. So great, yeah, I think, a lot of these, the lecturing is part of being a grad student. I think a lot of these can be summarized into your research or writing, right? And we go back to that time management that I talked to you about earlier, like, or time tracking, do it. See if your time is actually going to the things that you're telling me here that you are evaluated as, right? Is your time actually going, most of your time should be going to at least your work time. I would also, I didn't mention it, but I would advise that you don't track your personal time, So just do it like Monday through Friday. You know, like if you want to start at 8 a.m. and finish at 5 or 6 p.m. After that, it's your own time. If for whatever reason you like to work nights, then, you know, just flip it and track that. But, you know, you want to see how your time is being spent when you're at work, right? Nobody should be expecting you to be working on your personal time. Nobody should be expecting you to be doing your research and everything on the weekends. I think that's what's led to a lot of these toxic environments in academia, of this high expectations of you should be here on weekends, you should be working after hours. Ultimately, that translates to mental health, right? And if you're the people that work for you or work with you have a good, you know, quality of life outside of your lab or whatever it is, that ultimately translates into more efficiency into the lab. So to me, it doesn't really make sense to kind of drive people into the ground and expect all these things after hours. So I would advise you to just track your time spent at work, right? But yeah, ultimately, all this translates to be able to graduate and move on, you're gonna need some papers and grants. And let me stop sharing here. Come on. And to do that, you're gonna need to have a really good writing strategy, right? Or habit. So here is what I propose, right? So you need to establish a writing habit. The sooner the better. Again, don't wait until your last semester, don't wait until your last year, do it earlier. So what I tell students, because when I tell them that, they're like, well, I schedule 5-hour chunks to write. No, come on. If you sit down in a room for 5 hours and you did time tracking, most of the time would not be spent writing, right? That's a problem, obviously. This works a little bit better. Just start. Commit to writing at least 30 minutes a day. And the excuse that I always hear from students, like, well, it takes me 30 minutes to just get going. That's fine. But if you don't even start doing this, then you're never gonna get going, right? So at least start with 30 minutes a day and then adjust. For me, when I started this habit, I started with 30 minutes a day. I'm now at about 1.5 to 2 in the morning, so just writing. Right, that makes a huge difference. And this doesn't mean that it has to be the best quality writing, right? Writing is writing. The process, it's just a process, right? You get better as you go, right? So start with 30 minutes, just commit to that. Put it in your calendar, 30 minutes a day, whatever time you feel like you're the most awake and the most productive, and just focus on that, right? Like I said, put in your time and your calendar. Now, when I say make it specific, I make it very specific in my calendar. So I have this labeling system for my calendar. Instead of just saying writing time, I have the name of the manuscript that I'm working on, the section of the manuscript that I'm working on, right? So if I'm working on, let's say, materials and methods, that's what I'm going to focus on. I don't have to come in the morning and say, okay, I have to write, but what am I supposed to be working on? So everything's already there to make it easier. I'm supposed to be working on materials and methods for this manuscript or discussion for this other manuscript, right? So make it specific. Use a timer app. This helps, right? Because it helps you. There's apps on your phone. One is called Fauna, I believe. That's what I was using before. And Fauna, basically, there's apps that if you pick it up and you go on your phone to do something else, it basically stops your timer as in you didn't accomplish that. And with this app, you're kind of growing a forest, right? So as time is passing, you're growing a tree or a plant. And if you get out of that app to do something else, the tree dies, right? So then at the end of the week, you can see your forest and how dense or sparse it is based on your writing habits.
What did you say was?
I think it's called Fauna. Send me an email and I'm happy to share the name of the app. Actually, I have it on my phone right here. I'll tell you right now. Where is it? All right, here. Yeah, it's Flora. Sorry, it's called Flora. So it's a writing app. It's pretty cheap. And like I said, you can use it for a variety of things. It doesn't have to be writing. You can track other activities, right? Ultimately, consistency is the key. I personally think that the hardest thing about writing is beginning the process of writing.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're starting and stopping all the time, it's going to make it very difficult for you. But if you're writing at least 30 minutes every week, every day, there's consistency. You have that momentum.
And it has to be about like anything specific, like
The writing part?
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever you're working on, right? So like if you have an abstract, a project, write on that, right? Sometimes what I hear from students, and this is a problem for all of us, is, well, sometimes I'm too tired and I don't feel like writing, right? Push yourself. And here's what I do, because I feel like that sometimes too. work on something related to writing that requires low mental power. Right, so materials and methods is a very straightforward, simple section of a paper. Because you already have the protocols, you now just have to write them up. Right, so that takes less than interpreting results, writing a discussion, right? Yeah, exactly. So if you feel extra tired, still push yourself to write, do something that requires less brain power. Materials and methods, start putting citations together and things like that. That still makes you feel like you're making progress, right? Like I said, don't feel like writing, do it anyways. That for me, that works really well. And then have that accountability mechanism that I was talking about earlier. And this can be a friend, your mentor, whatever it is, right? If you have more questions about this, like I said, I love talking about this with my students, because they're also starting to learn how to write. And I think we have, we started a little late, so we do have a few more minutes. So I'm gonna wrap up with this. I wanted to do an activity, but I might just leave it for you to do as a homework. I'm not gonna check it. But, you know, a good way to combine everything, right? Remember I told you at the beginning that these tools are really useless unless you know your goals, your milestones, your deadlines. Your goals, like I said earlier, can't be, I will write a paper by the end of the semester. That is not a good goal. The best way to approach creating goals for yourself is using SMART goals. It is a strategy that's been used for many years. A lot of people are aware of this regardless of the field that they're in. But ultimately, it falls into these 5 categories. Number 1, your goal has to be specific, and I'm going to give you some examples in a second. Number 2, it has to be measurable. You have to know that you're making progress. You have to be able to measure that progress as you go along, right? Number 3, attainable, right? So again, we have to be realistic. It's a goal that has to be attainable, right? It has to be relevant. So again, relevant to your goals, right? So if you're in STEM, you're a PhD student, you know, this can be experiments, writing, right? So as long as it's relevant, right? And lastly, and I think one of the most important things, it has to be time-based. Otherwise, you can finish it whenever. You know, you can finish it in 10 years from now, right? And ultimately, it has to be time-based. You have to give yourself some form of timeline, whether it's, I'm going to write for 30 minutes, that's time-based, or whether it's by, you know, April 15th, I'm going to have the section of my materials and methods done for this paper. That's what we mean by time-based, right? I'm going to give you a quick example, right? So this is the example of the SMART goal. Well, this example is not so smart, right? I want to write a paper by the end of the semester. How can we make this smarter if we use those categories I just gave you? And you can write it in the chat, and then if somebody puts it, how can we make this goal smarter? You can break it down, right? So remember, be specific. Break it up into chunks, make it specific, make it time-based, relevant, attainable, right? So I'll wait maybe 1 more minute or 30 seconds if there's anything on there about other examples of how else, right? So 1 is break it down, right? Yeah. That's okay, totally fine. You're gonna get practice. I even brought handouts, but you know, I'll give you one, then I'll give you the rest if you want. I'm also happy to share links for these things. All right, so the first one, how do we make it specific? Here's some examples. I will gather all my data in PowerPoint by this date, right? You can't tell the story without knowing what the data says, right? I will identify the data that would actually end up in the paper. Not every experiment you've ever done is gonna end up on a paper, right? So you put it on there, and then you figure out what's necessary to tell the story. You're gonna identify 3 target journals that are a good fit for my story, right? Not all journals fit all stories, right? And based on that, now you know the guidelines for submission to that journal, the structure of the paper, what they're looking for, etc., right? By a specific date. I will complete the outline, right? So the skeleton of what your paper is going to have by this date and send it to my advisor for feedback, right? And sometimes that second part of feedback from the advisor can be a time void. So you don't know when that's going to come back, right? So that's why I'm telling you, give yourself as much time as possible. So that's how we make it specific, right? And then you can go through and break it down even more, right? Measurable. Again, how do you measure whether you're making progress on this? Well, I want to finish my results section by this date. Some people also use, I want to write 1,000 words a day. Whatever works for you. I like to have a specific date for when things are submitted, because I may not be able to write 1,000 words that day for whatever reason, but I'm still making progress, and I don't want to, or I want students to get discouraged because you didn't meet that goal, right? So by having a date, you can adjust however you want, as long as that product is by that date, right? Time-based. Again, I'm gonna write 30 minutes a day, Monday through Friday, right? Or like I said, up there, you already have dates of when things are due. And then obviously, I don't have to give you examples of making it relevant and attainable, right? Because writing a paper is attainable. You're in grad school, you can do this. And making it relevant, obviously, it's related to your work, the things that you're doing, right? But this is how I would start. And the activity I was gonna have is now write one goal for this semester. And then I was gonna have you revise it to make it a little bit smarter. And then I was gonna have you pass it to somebody else so they can give you feedback on making it even smarter, right? But you can do this by yourself. I can send the slides out. I know it's a lot. Happy to answer questions over email. You don't have to adopt everything here. These are things that I know work and I've worked for my students. And at the very least, do the weekly planning meeting. Start there, right? And if you want more guidance, you can shoot me an email whenever. I have some challenges for you, after leaving this. Track your time for the whole week. You don't have to start now. You can start next week, right, on Monday. Have a weekly planning meeting and start writing every day for at least 30 minutes. You can do all 3 of those. You can pick one. You don't have to do them all. Again, pick one and start small. Build upon these examples that I'm giving you in these tools. And that's really all I have. I'm here for questions, chatting, whatever. Thank you for your time, and I hope that was helpful. Oh,
Yeah, no, I thought it was great.
Yeah,
great. Thank you so much.
someone said, please share the handout.
Of course, yeah, for sure.
Do you have it in like a
If you
I
want,
do have it on my computer, so it's this handout. It's basically it's a step-by-step that walks you through making a smart goal. Right, so I'm gonna give you.
yeah, if you send me your presentation and that, Jesus, I'll.
Of course,
I'll
yeah,
send it.
yeah.
I have a question
Mhm.
for myself. For the weekly planner, so if you go back a few slides.
Yeah.
Before the pie chart. You talked about,
Oh, the time tracking?
no, the one before, sorry.
Oh, if you're talking weekly planning meeting, it's here.
Yes, you said that you had like
That's for the survey.
like a format or something that you share with your students.
Yeah, so this is a little bit different from the weekly planning meeting. So I am a very involved mentor in my lab and with my students. So I have 2 forms. So one is called a mentoring compact. I use that with every single one of my students, grad, undergrad. And basically the mentoring compact is a discussion between you and the student on what the expectations are of each other, right? Not just from the student, but also of me as a mentor, right? And we basically end that discussion, I have a series of questions, but that ends in, okay, let's identify 2 to 3 projects this semester that we want to accomplish together. And what resources do you need from me, or what resources do we need outside of the lab to accomplish these goals? It's just to I have them identify the goals and then use these strategies I've described to get to those goals. The other document I only use for PhD students. So the one I just described, the mentoring compact, I update it every semester with my students. The individual development plan is a document that was generated by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the AAAS. And it's a document for PhD students that helps them basically identify, the next stage career-wise. They ask a bunch of questions, and based on your interest, it can kind of say, potentially these careers will be interesting to you. But that document also has a way of planning year by year, right? Like, where do you want to be next year, right? This time next year, you have an oral qualifying exam coming up. What are the things that you want to finish up? So it's more like long-term as opposed to semester by semester. So I use both of those together with my students, and they work very well. Because it's more of an exercise of communication. So we're both on the same page about what we need to accomplish, and then it's clear in their mind, these are the 3 goals for this semester. Now I have to go back and break them down into smaller chunks through SMART goals. you know, put all that stuff into my calendar, identify deadlines for these things and all that. So that's, it's an ongoing conversation. Yeah. But I don't have like a template for the weekly planning meeting. This is, I just use like a white sheet of paper and I just put everything on there and then transfer it to my calendar.
Mayor Chula said, thank you for the wonderful presentation. I have never used any time management tool before, but I am impressed by this and plan to adopt it as well to track my progress.
Awesome. Yeah. I think they work. And honestly, we're in a world where there's so much going on all the time. There's so many expectations of all of us for their personal lives, professional lives. Really, time management organization really gives you that extra edge to have that extra time for yourself. Really, that's the ultimate goal. Yeah.
For your email, do you want us to share?
Yeah, you can put my email in the chat if you want. It's jesus.romo@utsa.edu. And I'll send you, when I get back to lab, I'll send you my slides.
Thank you, sir.
Well, thank all of you for your attention. I appreciate it. Very good.